On September 22, 2006, 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddart arrived at a relative's home in the quiet, upscale subdivision of Whispering Cliffs just outside Pocatello, Idaho. She had offered to house-sit for her aunt and uncle while they went out of town for the weekend. It was a simple task: feed the pets, lock the doors, and make sure the place stayed in one piece until they got back. Cassie wasn't the kind of teenager who caused trouble. She was responsible, dependable, the kind of girl adults trusted with things like this. She was soft-spoken, artistic, and stayed away from drama. She wasn't at a party. She wasn't out drinking. She was doing something responsible, something safe. Or so she thought. That night, her boyfriend came over to keep her company. They hung out, watched movies in the living room, and talked. For a while, it was quiet. Normal. Just the sound of the TV playing and the wind outside. The two of them couldn't know, that something was already very wrong. At some point during the evening, the power suddenly cut out. The lights flickered, then died. The TV went silent. The room darkened. The air felt heavier. Maybe it was just a blown fuse. Maybe the wind had knocked something loose. That's what Cassie and her boyfriend told themselves. But the silence that followed was deafening. They checked the basement, but nothing seemed obvious. Then, as suddenly as it had gone out, the power came back on. The lights returned. The tension faded slightly. But Cassie, she was still uneasy. It wasn't just the power outage. It was the way the house felt. Still. Quiet. Too quiet. Like it was watching her back. Her boyfriend offered to stay, but a call from his mother forced him to leave. He asked Cassie to come with him. She said no. She had promised to watch the house. She took her commitments seriously. And so, at around 10:30 that night, Cassie was left alone. In a house that felt less like a home and more like a trap. No one heard her scream. No one saw what happened in those final minutes of her life. What we know comes from the evidence left behind. The chaos. The blood. Sometime after midnight, Cassie was attacked. Stabbed 29 times. 12 of the wounds were fatal. There were cuts on her hands, signs she had tried to fight back. Defensive wounds. She had fought for her life. But she was overwhelmed. Whoever had done this didn't run. They didn't panic. They left her there, on the floor of the living room, bleeding out. No forced entry. No signs of a robbery. Just a lifeless teenage girl and an eerily untouched crime scene. Her aunt and uncle's 13-year-old son was the one who discovered her body the next day when the family returned home. What he saw scarred him forever. Blood on the carpet. Blood on the walls. A girl he had laughed with just days earlier, now cold and unrecognizable. Cassie's family was shattered. Her classmates were stunned. The town of Pocatello had never seen anything like it. Who could do something like this? Who would want to? She had no enemies. No drama. No reason to be targeted. At first, investigators looked inward. At friends, the boyfriend, even the family. They asked the usual questions. Who was the last person to see her alive? Had she seemed scared? Was she involved in anything unusual? But the truth would be stranger, darker, so much more disturbing. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't a break-in gone wrong. And it wasn't a stranger in the night. This was something planned, deliberate. And the most horrifying part, the killers were hiding in plain sight. Whispering Cliffs was the kind of neighborhood where people didn't lock their doors, where danger felt distant. That illusion shattered with Cassie's murder. Within hours of her body being discovered, crime scene tape surrounded the once quiet home. Neighbors watched from their porches in disbelief as officers moved in and out of the house, gathering evidence, taking photographs, and collecting anything that could answer the only question anyone cared about. Why Cassie? And who could have done this? The crime scene told a story, one of violence and chaos. There was blood on the carpet, smeared streaks on the walls, and signs of a struggle near the living room couch. The attack had been sudden and relentless. Cassie had tried to fight, but her attacker had the advantage: surprise, power, and a weapon. Investigators began the process of unraveling her final hours. Who had she spoken to? What had she said? Who knew she'd be alone that night? The first person they turned to was her boyfriend, Matt Beckham. Matt was brought in for questioning. He was calm, but shaken, tearful. His voice trembled when he talked about the last time he saw her. He said he'd offered to stay or bring her home with him, that he felt guilty for leaving, that Cassie had seemed scared, but determined to stay and fulfill her responsibilities. When asked if anyone else had come by that night, Matt said yes. 2 friends, Brian Draper and Tori Adamsick. Detectives wrote the names down. They were just classmates. They'd come by for a bit, watched part of a movie, then left. At first, it seemed like a dead end. But something about it stuck with investigators. Why had these 2 boys randomly dropped in on a Friday night? Why didn't they stay longer? Why did they leave, only to be followed by a murder? It wasn't long before the focus of their investigation shifted. Brian Draper and Tori Adamsick were interviewed separately. Brian came off nervous, fidgety, like he wanted to say more than he was allowed. He said they had gone to see a movie after leaving Cassie's house. He couldn't remember what movie they saw, or when. Tori's story was nearly identical, too identical. Word for word rehearsed. That was a red flag. Police dug deeper. They searched lockers, notebooks, and homes, and what they found started to raise alarm bells. In Brian's notebook were references to serial killers, sketches of people being stabbed. In Tori's belongings, a list of alibis, and an obsession with horror films. It was disturbing, but not yet conclusive, until they found the tapes. In a plastic bag, buried in a wooded area near the high school, detectives discovered a trove of evidence. Clothing, gloves, knives, all with traces of blood. DNA analysis would later confirm the blood belonged to Cassie. But the most damning item in the bag was a videotape detectives pressed play. What they saw would haunt them. The footage wasn't grainy or secret. It wasn't hidden. It was a confession in plain sight. On camera, Brian and Tori spoke openly, gleefully, about their plans. Brian, looking directly into the lens, says, "We found our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices." They laugh. They whisper. They discuss locking the doors, cutting the power, waiting in the basement. The night before the murder, they drive by Cassie's school. The camera shakes slightly as one of them says, "We're going to go down in history. I'm sorry, Cassie, but she has to die." They don't look remorseful. They look excited. Like 2 kids about to go on an amusement park ride. And after the murder, they film again. In the darkness, panting, almost giddy, Brian says, "We just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke." Tori adds, I stabbed her in the throat and saw her lifeless body. Dude, I just killed Cassie. There it was. Cold. Calculated. Clear. The mystery was over. The monsters weren't strangers. They weren't intruders in the night. They were two teenagers. Friends. Classmates. Boys Cassie had once trusted. Brian Draper was 16 years old. Quiet, socially awkward, with a fixation on history, particularly dark events. He claimed to admire Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, the Columbine shooters. He had recently written about mass murder in class essays. Tori Adamsick was also 16. Outgoing. Talkative. He wanted to be a filmmaker. He carried a video camera almost everywhere. He was obsessed with movies, especially horror. Halloween, Scream, Friday the 13th. But to him, it wasn't just fiction. It was inspiration. Together, they formed a dangerous echo chamber. They fed off each other's darkness, daring each other to go further. And eventually, they picked a target. Cassie. Because she was accessible. Because she trusted them. Because, in their eyes, she was expendable. The question that echoed through Pocatello, through Cassie's family, through the courtroom was, why? Why would two teenagers kill a girl who had done nothing to them? The answer was chilling. Because they wanted to, because they thought it would make them famous. The video evidence made it clear. This wasn't about rage, revenge, or mental illness. It was about legacy. Tori said in one clip, "We're going to be just like the Scream movie, except real. We're gonna make history." They idolized violence. They fantasized about it. And they thought murder would give their lives meaning. They didn't see Cassie as a person. They saw her as a plot point in their own twisted screenplay. In April 2007, Brian Draper went to trial first. He was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. His lawyers tried to paint Tori as the ringleader. They said Brian had been pressured, manipulated. But the jury saw the videos, read the journal entries, heard the confession. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In June 2007, Tori Adamsick faced the same charges. His defense also tried to shift the blame, this time toward Brian. But again, the evidence was overwhelming. He, too, was convicted and received the same sentence, life without parole. Two teenage boys. No prior criminal history. Now destined to die in prison. Cassie's family sat through both trials, listening to the details of their daughter's final moments. The laughter of her killers. The planning. The pride they took in her death. Her mother, Anna, later said, "They destroyed everything. They took our beautiful girl and treated her like she was nothing." The trauma didn't end in the courtroom. Her younger cousins, her friends, even teachers at Pocatello High struggled to process what had happened. Grief counseling was offered. The school held a vigil. Classmates wrote messages in chalk outside the school doors. But nothing could bring Cassie back. In the years since, both Brian and Tori have appealed their sentences. They've cited Supreme Court rulings about sentencing juveniles to life without parole. They've claimed they were too young to understand the weight of their actions. But courts have repeatedly denied them, because this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was premeditated. It was recorded. It was evil. Cassie's family continues to speak out, to fight back against any attempt at early release, to make sure the world remembers not the killers, But the girl they took away, Cassie Jo Stoddart. She would have graduated high school in 2008, maybe gone to college for art. She might have gotten married, started a family, traveled the world. Instead, her life ended at 16, stabbed to death on a cold floor by people she once called friends. Cassie Jo Stoddart wasn't famous. She wasn't trying to be. She was a teenager, doing the right thing, trusting the wrong people. Her story is one of betrayal, of cruelty, of senseless violence. But it's also a reminder that monsters don't always come from the shadows. Sometimes they sit beside you in class. Sometimes they call you their friend. And sometimes they carry knives and cameras. Cassie's funeral was held just days after the trial verdicts were delivered. Her casket was surrounded by white roses, handwritten letters from classmates, and photos of a life cut short. Mourners filled every pew. Some stood in the back. Others wept outside. Her school colors were worn as ribbons. Her artwork was displayed at the entrance of the church. A framed drawing she had done the month before now felt haunting. A sketch of a girl staring through a window at a world just beyond reach. Her parents didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their faces carried a grief that words couldn't touch. Cassie's mother, Anna Stoddart, later described those days in a televised interview. I would wake up every morning thinking I had just had the worst nightmare of my life, she said. And then I'd remember she really was gone, and I had to live that all over again. Cassie Jo Stoddart wasn't just a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a girl who loved to draw, who loved animals, who wanted to grow up and do something good in the world. She didn't get that chance. Because two boys wanted to be famous. They didn't earn fame. They earned infamy. And the only legacy that should matter now is hers.